The snow lay thick upon the forest floor, a heavy blanket of white that swallowed sound and softened edges. Silas Macready moved through the winter woods with the steady tread of a man who had long known solitude. Not the kind that hums with company, but the deep, hollow silence that echoes within the bones. His breath came out in pale clouds, fleeting like whispers, mingling with the sharp scent of pine and frozen earth. The cold was relentless, biting at his face and hands. But he bore it with a stoic patience, as though the chill were a companion rather than a foe. He paused at the edge of the timberline, where the skeletal outlines of Dry Creek stretched beneath a slate sky. The town was a muted cluster of buildings dusted with snow, each roof heavy and bowed beneath winter's weight. It was a place of whispered judgments and shuttered windows, where secrets clung as tightly as frost on brittle branches. Silas's eyes, dark and steady, took in the faint glow of lanterns flickering in the dusk. He had avoided this place for many seasons, but today necessity pulled him toward the square gathering place, not for warmth or joy, but for the cold business of barter and ownership. The wooden planks of the town square creaked underfoot as Silas entered the circle of faces assembled there. The air was thick with whispered rumors, hushed tones that carried suspicion like a cloak. Men and women huddled beneath heavy coats, their breath visible in short, nervous bursts. At the center, Old Man Harper stood like a sentinel, his voice slicing through the chill with practiced sharpness. "Next up for auction," he called, voice low and gravelly, "a woman with no name, no past given, bound by silence, veiled in mystery." From the shadows behind a battered post, the woman stepped forward. The coarse sack over her head was drawn tight, hiding her features and flattening the curve of her shoulders. Her movements were hesitant, almost resigned, as if the weight of the unknown pressed upon her like the winter snow. The crowd shifted uneasily, eyes darting with a mix of fear and morbid curiosity. Among them, Maggie Bell's whisper slithered through the cold air like a serpent's hiss. "She's troubled, that one," the woman said, lips curling with scorn. "A shame on any man who'd claim her. Best left to the shadows." Silas felt an unbidden tightening in his chest, not pity, not disdain, but something deeper. The woman was not an object to be bought or sold. She was a soul cloaked in pain and survival, invisible beneath the sack, but no less whole. When the bidding began, tentative and low, he surprised even himself by stepping forward. $2, barely more than a token, was all he offered. The crowd erupted in scoffs and murmurs, disbelief and ridicule swirling like the wind around them. "Foolish man," a voice spat from the crowd. "Wasting coin on a ghost." But Silas's gaze remained steady. "She'll have shelter," he said simply, voice roughened by years of silence, and no more chains. He led her away from the prying eyes, the sack still a shroud between them, the coarse fabric rubbing rough against his palm. The cabin he called home was a humble refuge nestled against the forest's edge, its hearth sputtering weakly against the winter's bite. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of pine smoke and damp wood, the dim light dancing upon frost-misted windows. Silas moved with care, offering her a worn coat, frayed at the cuffs but heavy with warmth. She accepted it wordlessly, the faintest tremor betraying a heart long weathered by fear and rejection. The sack remained in place, a silent barrier that neither dared yet to breach. Hours passed like quiet tides, measured by the fire's steady crackle and the soft sound of their breathing. Though words were absent, a delicate thread of understanding began to weave itself between them. In the flickering glow, her eyes emerged, dark, wide pools reflecting a blend of wary strength and shattered hope. Silas met her gaze without expectation or judgment, a small gesture of grace in a world often too cruel for kindness. Days followed in slow procession. Silas's routine unfolded with rhythmic certainty, the sharp chop of his axe cleaving frozen timber, the steady stacking of wood against the cabin wall. She remained near the fire, her fingers nimble and patient as she mended the ragged edges of tattered cloth. Their silence was not empty but charged, a quiet conversation spoken through small acts, a shared cup of broth, a carefully folded blanket, a glance lingering longer than chance. One night, the wind howled outside like a mournful ghost, rattling the cabin's weathered frame. Silas found her slowly peeling back the sack ever so slightly to let the moonlight brush a pale cheek. Her skin was fragile, translucent beneath scars that told stories she had never spoken aloud. Her eyes searched his, seeking a promise without words. Silas responded with a gentle smile, the kind that needed no speech to convey hope. He did not ask her name, not yet. The silence between them had become a sanctuary, fragile but sacred. Instead, he offered the warmth of steady presence. A light against the encroaching dark, the town's cold gaze did not waver. Gossip followed like shadows, sharp whispers carried on frosty winds. Maggie Bell's venomous tongue stitched tales of ruin and disgrace, painting the woman as a curse upon the community. Yet Silas remained untouched by their scorn, anchored by a quiet conviction that tenderness was a rebellion worth fighting in the tender morning light. When frost still clung to bare branches and the world held its breath, Silas heard the faintest whisper of a name. Evie, a fragile sound, soft as the first thaw beneath winter's grip. He repeated it gently, feeling the words settle between them like a fragile bloom tentative. Hopeful, alive. Within the cabin's humble walls, the coldness of the outside world seemed to falter. Two lives, once adrift and broken, found in each other a flicker of Grace's slow-burning ember against the relentless winter night, and yet, beyond the thin glass, the watchful eyes of Dry Creek still waited. Their judgment as biting as the frost, their whispers like sharp thorns upon the soul. But for now, in the quiet warmth of flickering firelight, Silas and Evie shared a fragile promise, one born not of grand declarations, but of small, enduring acts of kindness. The winter deepened, folding the world in layers of white silence that pressed against the cabin's walls. Outside, the wind whistled like an ancient lament, and the trees stood as stoic sentinels, their bare branches etched against a steel-gray sky. Inside, the fire flickered low, casting long, trembling shadows that seemed to hold secrets within their dance. Silas sat close, the warmth curling around his worn coat. His gaze fixed not on the flames, but on Evie. She sat by the window, her profile soft against the muted light of the fading day. The sack that once veiled her face had long since been cast aside, but its ghost lingered in the careful way she held herself guarded. Cautious, as if the world's sharp edges might still find purchase on her skin. Yet there was a new steadiness now, quiet resilience that had begun to root itself beneath the scars. Town whispers had not ceased. Maggie Bell's venom still seeped through Dry Creek's narrow streets, poisoning the air with suspicion. Silas knew the cold stares that followed them, the tight-lipped murmurs exchanged when their backs were turned. Sheriff Amos Hargrove, the town's unwavering law, observed them with a hardened expression, his presence a reminder that social order was a fragile thing, easily shattered by those who dared to break its surface. One evening, as twilight bled into night, Evie spoke for the first time since she had come to Silas's cabin. Her voice was a thread of sound, fragile yet unyielding, breaking the long silence like the first crack in ice. "My name is Evelyn Thatcher," she said, the syllables rolling off her tongue with a hesitant grace. Evie. The word hung in the air, a fragile offering. Silas turned to her, the firelight catching the glint in his eyes, a mixture of wonder and quiet reverence. "Evie," he repeated softly, as if tasting the name, committing it to the warmth of memory. Her story came in fragments, each piece a delicate shard of a life shattered by cruelty and betrayal. She spoke of a past cloaked in shadows, of a family torn apart by greed and violence, of nights spent hiding from a world that sought to break her. But beneath the weight of her confession was a steady thread of survival, the unspoken truth that she had endured where many would have faltered. Silas listened without interruption, his presence a sanctuary where shame could begin to thaw. He did not offer pity or judgment, only the steady comfort of someone who had known loneliness and chosen compassion. Their connection deepened, not through grand gestures, but in the quiet spaces between words, the way his hand brushed hers when he passed a cup of tea, the soft smile that lingered at the edges of his mouth when she laughed quietly to herself. But the outside world remained a relentless storm. One bitter night, The hollow silence of the town square shattered as voices rose in a tide of accusation. Maggie Bell led the charge, her words sharp and unforgiving, a spear aimed at their fragile peace. "You've brought shame to this town," she spat, eyes blazing with righteous fury. "A woman without a name, a past shrouded in darkness. How can you ask us to accept this?" The crowd's murmurs swelled into a chorus of condemnation, a gale of scorn that threatened to engulf them. Sheriff Hargrove stepped forward, his presence commanding, yet his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. "This cannot stand," he said, voice heavy with the weight of law and order. "For the town's sake, she must leave, or Silas must choose." Silas stood firm, his voice calm but unwavering. "She is no curse, no shadow to cast away. She is Evie, my wife, and I will stand by her, no matter the cost." The fire of his conviction lit the cold air, a beacon against the storm. Evie met his gaze, her own steady and bright. In that moment, she shed the last remnants of fear and shame, standing not as the woman hidden beneath a sack, but as one reclaimed by dignity and grace. The crowd's fury faltered, their sharp edges blunted by the unexpected strength of their union. A child's curious eyes broke through the darkened crowd, lingering on Evie with innocent wonder. Even Sheriff Hargrove's stern facade softened, the lines of duty giving way to the undeniable truth of love and resilience. The winter winds stilled for a breath, as if the world itself paused to witness this quiet triumph. Hand in hand, Silas and Evie turned away from the judgment, their footprints tracing a new path through the fresh snow, one carved not by cruelty but by grace. They moved together, not with the haste of defiance, but with the gentle assurance of those who have found shelter in one another. As the fire in the hearth dwindled to embers, a soft voice seemed to rise from the shadows, speaking to anyone who would listen. Even in the coldest winters, hearts can thaw. It is in the quiet endurance, the gentle gestures, and the courage to stand beside one another that true warmth is found. And to you who have shared this tale, know this life's harshest seasons may bury us beneath snow and shadow, but within the silence lies a strength waiting to bloom. May you carry this story as a light in your own winter, a reminder that every soul deserves kindness. Every story deserves grace. If this story has touched your heart, stay with us. Subscribe, and let the whispers of the Wild West guide you through tales of hope, resilience, and the quiet power of love.